As we inch closer and closer to the November midterm elections, Fox News is providing significantly more coverage of the U.S. Senate races than CNN or MSNBC. According to Media Matters, in the 4 weeks following Labor Day, Fox's weekday primetime broadcast mentioned the Democratic nominees in 7 competitive Senate races more than twice as many times on CNN and MSNBC's broadcast than CNN and MSNBC's broadcast did combined. Fox's primetime shows also mention Republican candidates more often than CNN and MSNBC. What's going on here, Robby?
So I found this fascinating for 2 reasons. One is just the underlying thing that Fox News is talking about these races far more than their competitors, probably because their competitors are still hung up on Trump-related drama. I mean, maybe January 6th, I don't know. So to the detriment of actual news, because people do care about what's going on. I mean, it's not that they don't care about those things, but generally the news channels, the political news channels, go super focused on midterms. I mean, we talk about midterms a lot because that's what, that's the big game. That's what people watch the political news channel for. So the fact that CNN and MSNBC are still so focused on kind of backward looking on Trump stuff, I thought was interesting. And then I also found it interesting the way Media Matters, because this is how it caught my attention. This was Media Matters framing, and it was like, it was a bad thing. That it was like, oh, Fox is talking about midterms constantly.
Well, what's the negative implication there?
I guess it was either they're concerned that Fox is talking about it, or like Fox is obsessed with it or something. I didn't quite get it, but Media Matters does like Fox did something bad. Yeah. That's everything they do. Sure. So you were supposed to take from it
it's insidious that they're telling the public what's going on.
Exactly.
I mean, obviously they followed up with some substantive critique of how the coverage went. That would be one
the coverage is very slanted in favor of Republican candidates, whatever. I don't think that would surprise anyone. But
apparently that's not what the article
No, it was just, they're talking about midterms. What can be done about this?
You see, this seems part and parcel of something that I've observed about liberals for a long time, which is that there is a kind of presumption that you don't even have to really know that much about your opponent. They're very bad. They're Republicans. They've made choices, and so there's not a need to know with any detail or specificity what their policies are, what they actually believe and don't believe. And I think that really hurts Democrats because they tend to make overly broad claims about people. They rely on claims that a person is racist or bigoted or things like that, which I gotta say may or may not be true case to case, instance to instance in varying degrees. But for people who are not getting that from Fox, who are not consuming those candidates in that way, those narratives that are all the Democrats often fall back on really fall flat. And they'll say things like, well, I don't need to know about so-and-so, he's obviously a bigot. Or let's say, I don't need to know about Herschel Walker or his policies or why people like him. The big one was, I don't need to understand Trump. And the vast majority of the Democratic Party continues not to understand Trump or why he was appealing to so many people, because they think, well, the act of even getting to know him, given that I've labeled him in my mind as a bigot, would sully me in some way. And so over and over again, I find that, frankly, Republicans are much more knowledgeable about their Democratic opponents and score a lot of points in fights that aren't necessarily indicative of who's the better candidate in my view, but they're much more effective debaters because they actually inform themselves about their opponents.
Yeah, I've noticed this exact thing you're talking about here, most notably with the Nevada race. The Democratic incumbent is Catherine Cortez Masto, and her opponent, the Republican, is Adam Laxalt. That was by far the name that took me the longest to learn because though I get tons of campaign materials for some reason, I'm not voting in Nevada, I don't know why, but I get a lot of materials about that race, and it's been my impression from looking at it that his name is not used with great frequency. That's just not you would not have casually learned, well, who is the opponent? Who are you running against? That's my impression from what they're doing in the race. That is the race that is going to decide. In my view, the Nevada race is the race. That is the one that is going to determine whether we still have a split Senate or we have an outright Democratic majority, or in theory a Republican outright majority. But I think it's going to be split or Democrat.
It feels like a communications choice to actually just really lean into the idea of just voting blue no matter who, pick the D's down ticket. It's almost a distraction to be specific about who your candidates are. And it also, I think, would challenge Democrats to contend with the vulnerabilities of their own candidates, too. Now, to be clear, as we talked about at length on this podcast, there are a lot of real stinkers that came out on top of the Republican primary, in part because the Democratic Party was funding their campaigns and hoping to Pied Piper strategy their way into victory.
Correctly and rightly. I mean, from a tactical standpoint, I think it's a morally appalling tactic, but it's working.
But what we're seeing, I noticed this in analysis analysis about Stacy Abrams. I did a radar about this a few weeks ago. I see this when we talk about, why Democrats aren't doing as well as they thought they would do in these various races. The analysis on the Democratic side of the aisle is so shallow, and it always redounds to, Stacy Abrams just can't overcome racism, or black men are sexist and therefore they won't vote for Stacy Abrams. And it's hard to challenge some of those claims because there's a
black
an
men
element.
Won't vote for Stacy Abrams.
Yeah, I mean
that
was like the poll information that I went through in that radar. And there's a lot of like online Twitter-ish discussion now where a lot of black men are feeling like they're being unfairly stigmatized in the context of this, especially since overwhelming majorities of black men still are voting for Democrats. There just are slightly fewer than black women who are voting for Democrats, But there is a refusal to contend with that. So you have Stacy Abrams, who was just appearing on the cover of Essence this month and who was trying to shore herself up in these kinds of ways. But God forbid there actually be a reckoning with what's actually happening on the ground.
Yeah. It's just, it's very interesting. It's clear that, look, there are a lot of people out there who are voting, and they're voting, as we said earlier in the show, they're voting for the R or the D no matter what. And that's certainly the game, the partisan media and the pundits are playing. But the elections are made, they're won or lost by that shrinking part of the country, but a part that exists, nevertheless, who sometimes will vote for Republican and sometimes will vote for Democrat. Those people still exist. Yes, there are not nearly as many of them. People have sorted themselves much more neatly than they used to be in the past, where you might, vote for a Democratic president because he looks good on TV, but you still like your local Republican official or something, and you're going to vote for a moderate Republican in Massachusetts, but you're going to vote for that whole thing. We do less of that now, certainly, but there's still people who, if you speak to their issues, they're gonna, what they're seeing in terms of the economy, in terms of crime, in terms of how what it is, or how they identify with the candidate, or what the candidate's personal strengths and weaknesses are. Those things still do matter because we're a very closely divided country. If we weren't a closely divided country, they wouldn't matter. But we are so closely divided that those independent or moderate people in both parties who wonder, who maybe they want Republican policies, maybe they are motivated by what Republicans are saying about education or COVID or something else, but they don't like Trump, and maybe and maybe I can't hold my nose and vote for a Trump person. There are people like that.
Yeah, look, but for the Obama to Trump voters, Trump would have never been president. They got fetishized hard and talked about in the media hard for 6 months, and then bringing them up became evidence of racism, because somehow the implication was if someone voted for Obama and then for Trump, they couldn't be bigoted. But
my
who cares?
Economic anxiety, remember that?
Yeah, at the end of the day, these racists, whatever you want to call them, voted for the black man to be president. So why can't you as a party figure out how to tap into whatever made them want to make that kind of a choice? Democrats have thrown their hands up on that, and we'll see what happens as a consequence in midterms. More Rising after this.